8 Golden Age stars whose lives were utterly destroyed by drugs. She died alone on the floor of a squalid apartment, her body only discovered after her dog began gnawing at her remains. He was found in an abandoned building, unclaimed, buried as a John Doe for over a year. She never reached 40. He looked 20 years older than his actual age when he died. These aren't isolated tragedies. They are the product of a system functioning exactly as intended. Behind the glittering facade of Hollywood's golden age, there lurked a machine that didn't just create stars. It manufactured them, exploited them, and in many cases, destroyed them. The drugs that fueled this machine weren't accidental or recreational. They were deliberate instruments of control. Amphetamines kept actors awake during 18-hour shooting days. Barbiturates knocked them out between takes, allowing production schedules to run like clockwork. Addiction was predictable, inevitable even, but studios feigned shock when stars became dependent, pretending it was all their personal failing. The pattern was ruthlessly efficient. Build stars up, chemically manage their bodies to meet impossible demands, discard them when the addiction made them unreliable, then publicly blame them for their downfall. What makes these stories truly horrifying isn't merely the wasted lives. It's the hypocrisy of an industry that handed a 13-year-old girl her first stimulant pills, then blacklisted her when her dependence became apparent. It's the executives who kept doctors on the payroll to dispense sedatives, only to express public disappointment when their stars lost control. Hollywood gave them the drugs, then blamed them when those same drugs worked exactly as intended. Today, we are diving into the 8 most devastating drug tragedies of Hollywood's golden age. Stories of addictions manufactured by the studio system, careers incinerated, and bodies discovered too late. Bobby Driscoll, Disney's discarded golden boy. The most tragic story among Hollywood's fallen stars begins with Bobby Driscoll, Disney's first contract child actor. Handpicked by Walt Disney himself, Driscoll embodied the ideal all-American boy, bright-eyed, charming, and brimming with natural talent. From the start, his life seemed entwined with cinematic destiny. He became the face of wholesome family entertainment, lending his voice to Peter Pan, appearing in live-action feature films, and starring in productions that cemented him as a symbol of childhood innocence for millions. Critics praised his expressive performances, and audiences adored the young actor whose smile and charisma seemed to define a generation. In the golden age of family cinema, Bobby Driscoll was not merely a child star. He was an icon, a living embodiment of Disney's carefully curated world of idealized youth. Yet the affection of Disney and Hollywood was conditional, fragile, and rooted in image rather than genuine care. As Driscoll entered adolescence, his appearance changed. The bright-eyed, cherubic face that had won the hearts of the public and the studio alike began to fade. Disney, whose empire was built on controlling and marketing innocence, turned on him. Driscoll was not merely released from his contract, he was blacklisted. Studios were warned that he was difficult, and doors that had once opened effortlessly for him suddenly closed. The child who had endured 60-hour work weeks, who had been celebrated for his discipline and charm, found himself suddenly unemployable. His transition into a normal life outside the studio system was brutally mismanaged, leaving him isolated and unprepared. In school, classmates mocked his fading fame, compounding a deep sense of rejection and inadequacy. By his late teens, Driscoll sought escape through self-medication. Alcohol provided temporary relief, followed by heroin, as the young actor wrestled with the emotional whiplash of sudden obscurity. "Disney taught me to use drugs," he confided to a friend. "The studio gave me pills to stay awake, pills to sleep, before I even knew what addiction was." What had once been tools of productivity, prescribed or facilitated by the studio to maintain the grueling child star schedule, became instruments of entrapment. His formative years, marked by constant chemical intervention, left him vulnerable to addiction, shaping a downward trajectory that seemed unstoppable. By his early 20s, Bobby Driscoll's life had spiraled into tragedy. Arrests for drug possession punctuated failed attempts to reclaim his career, while isolation and desperation deepened. In 1968, the grim final chapter unfolded when children exploring an abandoned East Village tenement discovered his body. Surrounded by pamphlets, empty beer bottles, and the remnants of a life unraveling, he was unrecognizable. He was buried anonymously as a John Doe on Hart Island, only to be identified nearly a year later. At 31, Driscoll's body bore the signs of decades older, a physical testament to a life prematurely aged by addiction and neglect. The company that had once plastered his image across lunchboxes, magazines, and television screens never acknowledged his death. Bobby Driscoll's story stands as a haunting emblem of Hollywood's harsh realities. The merciless machinery of fame, the conditional love of studios, and the human cost of manufacturing innocence for profit. His life reminds us that behind every child star's smile, there may lie vulnerability, exploitation, and a cautionary tale of brilliance lost to the shadows. Judy Garland, MGM's chemical casualty. No story of Golden Age Hollywood addiction is more emblematic or more heartbreaking than that of Judy Garland. From the tender age of 13, she became the subject of a studio-controlled regimen that would shape her life in ways far beyond the camera lens. MGM studio doctors began administering her first pills, a practice that was far from optional or incidental. It was mandatory. Amphetamines, often disguised as vitamins, were used to keep her awake during grueling, often interminable shoots. Appetite suppressants managed her weight, ensuring that Garland conformed to the physical ideals the studio demanded, while barbiturates were prescribed to knock her out when the stimulants left her restless and anxious. Garland's body, energy, and even mood were meticulously controlled, a life engineered entirely to meet the ceaseless demands of MGM's production machine. By 16, Garland was trapped in a cycle of chemical dependency she neither fully understood nor consented to. Her youth, her health, and her autonomy were subordinated to studio schedules and profit margins. Executives, including Louis B. Mayer himself, oversaw every detail of her daily existence, from meals to medications, ensuring that she remained the perfect image of a child star and, later, a youthful ingenue. Garland's extraordinary talent and charm were exploited with ruthless precision, yet her personal well-being was secondary. When the studio finally fired her in 1950, after 15 years of this manipulation, they offered no support, no rehabilitation, no understanding. Instead, they labeled her difficult and unreliable, industry euphemisms for a chemically dependent young woman they had helped create. The consequences were devastating. Garland's career became a series of professional and personal setbacks. Years of enforced drug use had left deep emotional and physiological scars. She struggled with relationships, finances, and physical health, each setback compounded by the lingering effects of decades of stimulant and barbiturate abuse. The pressures of fame and the relentless expectations of the studio left her vulnerable to further exploitation and heartbreak, a cycle that would shadow her for the rest of her life. By the time she died alone in a London bathroom at the age of 47, Garland's body bore the marks of a life aged far beyond its years. Her youthful vitality, once the foundation of her stardom, had been eroded by decades of studio-imposed chemical dependence and relentless professional pressure. The same studio executives who had overseen her medication and rigid schedule outlived her, indifferent to the human devastation they had helped orchestrate. Garland's story is not merely one of individual tragedy. It is a reflection of a system that prized profit, image, and control above human dignity. Judy Garland's life and untimely death stand as a haunting illustration of Hollywood's cold efficiency. She was a prodigious talent, chemically molded to meet the demands of a machine, only to be discarded when she no longer fit the image they had manufactured. Her brilliance, her vulnerability, and her ultimate demise remain a stark reminder of the human cost behind the golden veneer of Hollywood's most celebrated era. Garland's legacy endures not only in her artistry, but also as a cautionary tale of exploitation, addiction, and the tragic consequences of a system that revered image over life. Gail Russell, Paramount's terrified beauty. Gail Russell's story is a tragic testament to the dark side of Hollywood's golden age, a tale of forced self-medication, exploitation, and the cruel machinery of stardom. Discovered while attending art school, Russell was a naturally shy and inexperienced young woman, entirely unprepared for the intense glare of studio life. Paramount Pictures, captivated by her ethereal beauty and delicate features, thrust her in front of cameras with little guidance or training, expecting her to perform flawlessly despite crippling stage fright. On set, her anxiety was so severe that she would sometimes vomit before scenes, a physical manifestation of the terror that haunted her. The solution offered by directors and crew members was alarmingly simple: alcohol. Drinks were handed to her as a crutch, a temporary shield to calm her nerves and make her camera ready. What began as a coping mechanism gradually evolved into a consuming dependency. Russell, the young woman whose quiet charm and otherworldly presence had captivated audiences, became increasingly reliant on alcohol to survive the demands of each shoot. Her hands began to tremble, her skin lost its luminous quality, and the delicate beauty that studios had marketed so carefully began to fade. The very substance that had been presented as a tool to aid her performance slowly eroded her health, her career, and ultimately her life. Alcohol was no longer a temporary aid, it became an unrelenting companion that shaped her existence. As the years passed, Russell's career faltered. The studio system, once eager to promote her as a rising star, showed little interest in supporting her through her struggles. Roles disappeared, opportunities vanished, and the young woman who had been a promising and delicate starlet found herself isolated, her personal and professional identity increasingly defined by addiction rather than talent. Paramount and the industry at large turned away, indifferent to the suffering of the performer they had groomed and then abandoned. By 1961, at the age of 36, Gail Russell died alone, surrounded by empty bottles, a victim of the very substance that had been forced upon her as part of her professional life. Her death certificate cited alcohol as the cause, yet there was no acknowledgement of the studio system that had orchestrated the conditions for her decline. Russell's story is a haunting example of Hollywood's callousness during its golden age. Young talent was often exploited for profit, personal struggles were ignored or dismissed, and the human cost of stardom was treated as irrelevant to box office success. Her life illustrates how beauty and delicate talent could be commodified, manipulated, and ultimately destroyed when the industry's pressures became too great. The cruel irony of Russell's existence lies in the fact that the very means designed to help her survive her anxiety, the alcohol provided as a professional necessity, became the instrument of her downfall. Today, Gail Russell's story remains a cautionary tale. It is a stark reminder that Hollywood's glamour often masks a more sinister reality, where young performers are not just celebrated, but consumed. Her legacy is one of lost beauty, interrupted talent, and the devastating consequences of an industry that prioritized appearance over the well-being of those who created its magic. Russell's tragic life and untimely death endure as a powerful testament to the human cost of fame, a haunting reminder that the price of stardom in Golden Age Hollywood could be a life cut far too short. Montgomery Clift, Pain and Prescription. Hell. Montgomery Clift, long hailed as one of Hollywood's most sensitive and emotionally nuanced leading men, endured a life-altering event in 1956 that would forever change the course of his life. That year, Clift was involved in a severe car accident that left his face permanently scarred and inflicted both physical and emotional pain of immense proportions. The injury alone might have ended the careers of less resilient actors, but for Clift, it was only the beginning of a new, darker struggle. What followed was not just recovery, It was a pharmaceutical nightmare. In the aftermath of the accident, Clift was prescribed powerful painkillers to manage his suffering. The medications, often administered in high doses and without careful oversight, became the foundation of a growing dependency. Studio doctors, eager to keep him working, routinely prescribed additional drugs to counteract side effects or to manage the fatigue of grueling shooting schedules. Alcohol, introduced socially and often as a coping mechanism, compounded the danger. What began as legitimate treatment quickly evolved into an iatrogenic addiction, one caused not by reckless use, but by medical and professional pressures. By the early 1960s, the impact of this dependency was unmistakable. Clift struggled to memorize lines and maintain consistency on set. His unreliability forced insurance companies to require special bonds for productions wishing to hire him. Directors had to plan shoots around his condition, often modifying scenes or scheduling around the times when his medications were least disruptive. Friends and colleagues watched with concern as one of Hollywood's most talented performers became increasingly trapped by a system that had failed to protect him. On July 23, 1966, Montgomery Clift was found dead at the age of 45. The official cause was recorded as a heart attack, but those who knew him understood that decades of prescription drugs combined with alcohol had ravaged his body and mind. His early promise and extraordinary talent had been overshadowed by a life constrained by injury, dependency, and an industry that prioritized productivity over personal well-being. Clift's story is a sobering example of how the combination of medical intervention and studio pressures can transform necessary care into a slow, destructive path. His tragedy reminds us that even the most brilliant and sensitive stars were not immune to the unforgiving machinery of Hollywood, where fame and talent often came at the cost of health, and sometimes life itself. Bela Lugosi, Dracula's Human Tragedy. Bela Lugosi, forever immortalized as Count Dracula, became a tragic example of how Hollywood's pressures and physical suffering could converge into a lifelong downward spiral. Known for his magnetic presence and haunting performances, Lugosi's career took a dark turn when chronic sciatic pain began to dominate his life. What began as a physical ailment gradually led to morphine dependence, prescribed initially to manage legitimate suffering. But as the pain persisted and the doses increased, the drug slowly tightened its grip, altering both his health and his career trajectory. Lugosi faced more than just physical challenges. His thick Hungarian accent, which had contributed to the hypnotic charm of his early performances, increasingly became a limitation in an industry that demanded versatility. Typecasting confined him almost entirely to horror roles, restricting opportunities for dramatic growth and steady work. As roles became scarce, the stress of financial instability and professional frustration compounded his reliance on medication, creating a vicious cycle of pain, dependence, and limited career options. By the late 1940s, the effects of Lugosi's addiction were visible to those around him. His appearance showed the toll of years of morphine use, while his reliability on set became erratic. The actor, who had once dominated marquee screens, found himself relegated to low-budget films, often produced by desperate or eccentric directors, including Ed Wood. These productions were a far cry from the high-profile work that had made him an international star, but they provided the necessary funds to maintain his prescriptions and attempt to stabilize his increasingly fragile existence. Lugosi's final years were marked by financial hardship and declining health. He died in 1956 at the age of 73, largely defined by the very character that had brought him fame, yet trapped him in typecasting and addiction. Though celebrated for his iconic portrayal of Dracula, his legacy is inseparable from the personal struggles he endured: chronic pain, dependency on prescription medication, and the limitations imposed by Hollywood's narrow vision of his talents. Decades later, Bela Lugosi's story remains a stark reminder of the destructive intersection between physical suffering, professional decline, and substance dependence in Hollywood. Even legendary stardom could not shield him from the harsh reality that the industry often left its aging and ailing actors to navigate their pain alone, sometimes with fatal consequences. Barbara Payton, Hollywood's fastest fall. Few careers in Hollywood collapsed as rapidly and completely as Barbara Payton's. Once celebrated as a bright young starlet, she was under contract with Warner Brothers and seemed destined for fame and fortune. Her breakthrough came with a role opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, which showcased her striking beauty and magnetic screen presence. In those early years, Payton embodied the promise of a new generation of leading ladies, her future seemingly limitless. But the combination of Hollywood's harsh double standards, personal choices, and the pressures of sudden fame quickly unraveled her life. A highly publicized love triangle scandal involving actor Franchot Tone and Tom Neal made her tabloid fodder, illustrating how the industry and the press mercilessly scrutinized women while largely excusing men. The scandal, amplified by studio politics, severely damaged her reputation and limited her professional opportunities. Once a rising star, she found herself blacklisted from major productions, struggling to secure work commensurate with her talent and potential. As professional doors closed, Payton's reliance on substances deepened. Barbiturates, initially a coping mechanism for stress and anxiety, became a habitual escape. Alcohol followed, and eventually heroin entered the picture, intensifying her downward spiral. Her physical transformation was striking. Photos from 1951 show a vibrant, glamorous young woman, while by 1956 she had become a disheveled, haunted shadow of her former self. The combination of addiction, depression, and the relentless pressures of her public life left her emotionally and physically depleted. With no support network, dwindling finances, and few legitimate acting opportunities, Payton turned to sex work as a means of survival. This desperate adaptation further eroded her public image and personal sense of identity. Her once promising career and alluring screen presence were erased by addiction, societal judgment, and a lack of safety nets for women in Hollywood at the time. Barbara Payton's tragic decline culminated in her death in 1967 at the age of 39. Her body, ravaged by years of drug and alcohol abuse, malnutrition, and heart damage, bore silent witness to a life destroyed by a combination of personal struggles and systemic exploitation. Payton's story is a haunting example of how Hollywood could build up a starlet with dazzling promise, only to watch her life and identity crumble under the pressures of fame, scandal, and addiction. Errol Flynn, living dangerously, dying young. Errol Flynn, Hollywood's quintessential swashbuckler, captivated audiences with his athleticism, charm, and fearless on-screen persona. From Captain Blood to the adventures of Robin Hood, Flynn became synonymous with daring exploits, both in the cinematic world and in his personal life. However, the same recklessness that thrilled audiences masked a darker reality, a life consumed by substance abuse. Alcohol was ever present, cocaine and opiates fueled his late nights, and barbiturates became a crutch to manage exhaustion and emotional strain. What began as indulgence quickly became dependency, leaving Flynn trapped in a cycle he could neither control nor escape. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Flynn's addictions were not hidden. Studio insiders, co-stars, and journalists were well aware of his habits, and he often incorporated tales of his debauchery into his public persona. Gambling, brawling, and hard drinking became part of the mythos surrounding the actor. Yet this carefully curated image came at a steep cost. Flynn's once athletic frame deteriorated under the weight of years of abuse, and by his 40s he struggled with basic physical tasks. During film productions, he frequently relied on body doubles, stunt coordinators, and specially arranged sets to compensate for his declining stamina and deteriorating health. Flynn's physical decline was mirrored by his internal deterioration. Decades of alcohol and drug use ravaged his cardiovascular system, liver, and other vital organs. His body, while still charismatic in appearance, functioned like that of a man decades older than his chronological age. Despite occasional attempts at rehabilitation, the culture of excess that surrounded Flynn and his own unwillingness to change ensured that his decline was inevitable. On October 14, 1959, Flynn died in Vancouver at the age of 50. The official cause of death was heart failure, but medical examinations revealed a body deeply worn by years of relentless substance abuse. His cardiovascular system, liver, and other organs bore the unmistakable marks of decades of excess, leaving him with the physiology of a man in his 70s. Flynn's death was a cautionary tale for Hollywood. Even immense talent and charm could not shield one from the consequences of unbridled addiction. Errol Flynn's life story has endured as both legend and warning. He remains a symbol of a bygone era where personal excess was glamorized, celebrated, and ultimately destructive. His career illustrates how Hollywood rewarded charisma and spectacle while often ignoring or even enabling the self-destructive behaviors of its stars. Flynn's tragic decline cemented a template for future generations: thrilling, publicized indulgence, followed by inevitable deterioration, a cycle repeated again and again in the annals of Tinseltown. John Drew Barrymore, The Dynasty of Destruction. John Drew Barrymore's life reads like a cautionary tale of inherited talent entwined with inherited tragedy. Born into one of Hollywood's most storied acting families, he carried